All right. Ian?
Wait, when I first saw this, could you go back to the Tinder thing?
No, not right now.
Okay, so when I first saw the Tinder picture, I thought it was this big branch on the side of the mountain that like
Yeah.
and then like blue sky,
Interesting. All right, chapter 15. Aslan makes a door in the air.
we still have 2 pages left.
In 14? Oh, that's right, because Aslan had been going through the towns. That's right. We're on page 215. Okay, so this is when Aslan is, they've destroyed now the bridge at Baruna, and they're going across to the village to set free the people in Baruna. And it's kind of a 50-50 chance whether or not the people will go with him or they'll be scared to run away from him. At a well in a yard, they met a man who was beating a boy. The stick burst into flour in the man's hand. He tried to drop it, but it stuck to his hand. His arm became a branch, his body the trunk of a tree, his feet took root. This boy, who had been crying a moment before, burst out laughing and joined them. Why? Oh, we talked about why that boy was saved, right? Because when Aslan comes, all that is evil is stopped, such as the man beating the boy. At a little town halfway to Beaver's Dam, where 2 rivers met, they came to another school, where a tired-looking girl was teaching arithmetic to a number of boys who looked very much like pigs. She looked out of the window and saw the divine revelers, or partiers basically, singing up the street, and a stab of joy went through her heart. Aslan stopped right under the window and looked up at her. "Oh, don't," she said. "I'd love to, but I mustn't. I must stick to my work. And the children would be frightened if they saw you." "Frightened?" said the most pig-like of all the boys. "Who's she talking to at that window?" "Let's tell the inspector," or the principal. "She talks to people out of the window when she ought to be teaching us." "Let's go and see who it is," said another boy, and they all came crowding to the window. But as soon as their mean little faces looked out, Bacchus gave a great cry of
You want.
and all the boys began howling with fright and trampling one another down to get out of the door and jumping out of the windows. And it was said afterward, whether truly or not, that these particular little boys were never seen again. But there were a lot of very fine little pigs in that part of the country which had never been there before. "Now, dear heart," said Aslan to the mistress, and she jumped down and joined them. At Beaver's Dam they recrossed the river and came east again along the southern bank. They came to a little cottage where a child stood in the doorway crying. "Why are you crying, my love?" asked Aslan. The child, who had never even seen a picture of a lion, was not afraid of him. "Auntie's very ill," she said. She's going to die." Then Aslan went in at the door of the cottage, but it was too small for him. So when he got his head through, he pushed with his shoulders. Lucy and Susan fell off when he did this, and he lifted the whole house up, and it fell backward and apart. And there, still in her bed, though the bed was now in the open fresh air, lay a little old woman who looked as if she had dwarf blood in her. She was at death's door, but when she opened her eyes and saw the bright, hairy head of the lion staring into her face, she did not scream or faint. She said, "Oh, Aslan, I knew it was true. I've been waiting all my life. Have you come to take me away?" "Yes, dearest," said Aslan, "but Not the long journey yet. And as he spoke, like the flush creeping along the underside of a cloud at sunrise, the color came back to her white face, and her eyes grew bright, and she sat up and said, "Why, I do declare I feel that much better. I think I could even take a little breakfast this morning." "Here you are, mother," said Bacchus, dipping a pitcher in the cottage well and handing it to her. But what was in it now was not water, but the richest wine, red as red currant jelly, smooth as oil, strong as beef, warming as tea, and cool as dew. What is that a reference to? Layla? Very good. The wedding at Cana from the Bible, when Jesus turns the water into wine. His very first miracle, public miracle. Yes.
I was also gonna say it's goes to the theme of I think it kind of goes to the theme of inside versus outside.
Okay, how so?
Because it's like when you look in, you think it's water, but it's just.
That's not bad. Good. It could go with the theme. "Hey, you've done something to our well," said the old woman. "That makes a nice change, that does." And she jumped out of bed. "Ride on me," said Aslan, and added to Susan and Lucy, "You two queens will have to run now." "But we'd like that just as well," said Susan, and off they went again. And so at last, with leaping and dancing and singing, with music and laughter and roaring and barking and neighing, they all came to the place where Miraz's army stood, flinging down their swords and holding up their hands. And Peter's army, still holding their weapons and breathing hard, stood around them with stern and glad faces. And the first thing that happened was that the old woman slipped off Aslan's back and ran across to Caspian, and they embraced one another, for she was his old nurse.
Yay! Happy friends!
What happened to his old nurse? Aiden?
She was sent away to go teach at the school.
Because why? Why was she sent away?
She was sent away because she was trying to have many lies about old mother.
Very good. Chapter 15. Aslan makes a door in the air. At the sight of Aslan, the cheeks of the Telmarine soldiers became the color of cold gravy. What's the color of cold gravy? Matthew?
White.
Kind of whitish grayish, right? What does it mean when someone's face turns white? Connor?
Really scared and
Very good.
they're like,
Their knees knocked together, and many fell on their faces. They had not believed in lions, and so this made their fear greater. Even the red dwarfs, who knew that he came as a friend, stood with open mouths and could not speak. Some of the black dwarfs, who had been of Nicobric's party, began to edge away. Why would they begin to edge away from Aslan? Brian?
I'm scared because they were the main dwarfs for Jadis.
Jadis? Oh, is that her name? Oh, okay. Yes, they were the ones that had tried to bring back the White Witch. So they're kind of like, ooh, we messed up and now he's going to be mad at us. But all the talking beasts surged around the lion, with purrs and grunts and squeaks and whinnies of delight, fawning on him with their tails, rubbing against him, touching him reverently with their noses, and going to and fro under his body and between his legs. Kind of like how cats do when they're excited to see you. You know, they kind of like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Okay, Matthew. If you've ever seen a little cat loving a big dog, whom it knows and trusts, you will have a pretty good picture of their behavior. Then Peter, leading Caspian, forced his way through the crowd of animals. "This is Caspian, sir," he said, and Caspian knelt and kissed the lion's paw. How does Caspian feel towards Aslan? What he just said, what does that show? Brooklyn? He shows respect to him. "Welcome, Prince," said Aslan. "Do you feel yourself sufficient to take up the kingship of Narnia?" Okay, so this is interesting. The first thing Aslan asks him and says, do you feel like you're ready to be the king of Narnia? Do you feel like you are good enough to be the king of Narnia? Look at Caspian's response. I don't think I do, sir, said Caspian. I'm only a kid. Does Caspian say that he feels like he's ready to be king? No. Why do you think he would say that? Why would he maybe not think he's ready? Edgar? Because what? He might mess up. Okay. Aiden, what else?
Two things. One, he killed an Arnian.
Okay, he killed an Arnian.
And two, he ran away.
He ran away from his uncle. Okay. Both of those actions I would say were in self-defense. But maybe. Okay, let's see what he says. Aslan says, good, said Aslan. If you had felt yourself sufficient, it would have been a proof that you were not. He said, if you had answered me, yeah, I'm ready, that would have been proof that you're actually not ready. Therefore, under us and under the High King, you shall be King of Narnia, Lord of Cair Paravel, and Emperor of the Lone Islands. You and your heirs as long as your race lasts. And your coronation. But what have we here? Okay, pause. I want to talk about Aslan's response. Why does he say it's good that Caspian doesn't feel like he's ready? Layla? Very good. Aslan says, because you're showing humility and you're recognizing that you may not be the best at this job, that means that you actually are going to be a good king. So what does Aslan say is a necessary quality for being a good leader? A necessary quality that you have to be a good leader. Ian?
To make sure that you don't think that you're better than everyone else.
Very good.
There's always someone better than you.
Very good. Humility. Okay? You cannot lead people or influence people when you think you're the best thing since sliced bread, right? Look at me. This is important. You cannot lead people or influence people or really have any good effect on someone when you are the one bragging about how good you are or how wonderful your last thing was. Okay? Aslan says that. He says the fact that you don't feel like you're ready to be a king, that shows me that you actually are. Because I know that you will lead my people with humility. Okay? Now, that does not mean that Cassie walks around not sure of anything that he does. Oh, I'm the worst at this and the worst at this. No. He just knows that I may not be the best. But because Aslan has declared me king, I know that I'm supposed to be doing this. Okay? All right. And your coronation. Wait a second. But what do we have here? For at that moment, a curious little procession was approaching. 11 mice, 6 of whom carried between them something on a litter made of branches. But the litter was no bigger than a large atlas. No one has ever seen mice more woebegone than these. They were plastered with mud, some with blood too, and their ears were down and their whiskers drooped, and their tails dragged in the grass, and their leader piped on his slender pipe a melancholy tune, meaning like a sad tune. On the litter lay what seemed little better than a damp heap of fur, all that was left of Reepicheep. He was still breathing, but more dead than alive, gashed with innumerable wounds, one paw crushed, and, where his tail had been, a bandaged stump. Now, Lucy, said Aslan. Lucy had her diamond bottle out in a moment. Although only a drop was needed on each of Reepicheep's wounds, the wounds were so many that there was a long and anxious silence before she had finished, and the master mouse sprang from the litter. His hand went at once to his sword hilt, and with the other he twirled his whiskers. He bowed. "Hail, Aslan!" came his shrill voice. "I have the honor—" But then he suddenly stopped. The fact was that he had still had no tail. Whether that Lucy had forgotten it or that her cordial, even though it could heal wounds, couldn't make things grow again. Reepicheep became aware of his loss as he made his vow. Perhaps it altered something in his balance. He kind of fell over because he used to have that big long tail there, but it had been chopped off. Okay? He looked over his right shoulder. Failing to see his tail, he strained his neck further until he had to turn his shoulders and his whole body followed. But by that time, his hindquarters had turned too and were out of sight. Then he strained his neck looking over his shoulder again, with the same result. Only after he had turned completely around 3 times did he realize the dreadful truth. Okay, Matthew, stand up. Show us what you were just doing. Now turn around. Keep going, like a dog chasing its tail. All the way around. Make a circle as you're looking. Yeah, like that. Like that. That's what Reepicheep's doing. Okay? Thank you. Looking for his tail. It's been chopped off. Okay? He's looking. Okay, Caleb, so all you've missed so far is we finished up the last chapter. Basically, Aslan saves a bunch of people. Then, in this chapter, he meets Caspian for the first time. Okay? And he asks Caspian a very important question. He says, "Do you think you're ready to be king of Narnia?" And Caspian said, "Actually, I don't think I do." And Aslan says, "Because you think you're not ready, that shows me that you are ready." In saying that, Caspian has to have humility. He can't think he's the best or he won't be able to lead the country. Okay? And now he's healing Reepicheep. So we're on page 222. Yes, Connor.
It's kind of like you don't supposed to reverse
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I read your book, but there was like this good and it's connected around food. Actually, I didn't read food. It's too much responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I told you there's too much responsibility.
Okay. So then Reepicheep says, "Oh, I am confounded, as in I am extremely embarrassed," said Reepicheep to Aslan. I am completely out of countenance. I must crave your indulgence for appearing in this unseemly fashion. He says, "I am not fit to be in Aslan's presence. I'm messed up. I'm missing a tail. I don't look right. I'm not ready. I'm not perfect." And Aslan says, "It actually becomes you very well, small one," said Aslan. Aslan says, "Actually, it looks pretty good on you. I kind of like you with no tail." "All the same," replied Reepicheep, "if, anything could be done, perhaps Her Majesty?" And here he bowed to Lucy. What is he asking Lucy to do? Brooklyn? Yeah, he's like, "Give me a little bit more of that magic stuff. Maybe my tail will grow back." "But what do you actually want with a tail?" asked Aslan. "Oh, sir," said the mouse, "I can eat and sleep and die for my king without one. But a tail is the honor and glory of a mouse." Aslan says, "I have sometimes wondered, friend," said Aslan, "whether you do not think too much about your own honor." Ooh, Aslan gives him a little spanking. He says, "Listen, I think you may be too concerned about how you look and what other people think of you. The only person who's going to be offended if you don't have a tail is you." You see what he's saying? You're a little too concerned with how important your tail is to you. Yes. "Highest of all high kings," said Reepicheep, "permit me to remind you that a very small size has been bestowed to us mice, aka you made us very small, and if we did not guard our dignity, some, who weigh our worth in inches, would allow themselves very unsuitable pleasantries at our expense." He says, if we don't have our tails to at least be proud of, people are going to make fun of us for how small we are. So can we at least have our tails? "That is why I have been at some pains to make it known that no one who does not wish to feel this sword as near his heart as I can reach shall talk in my presence about traps or toasted cheese or candles. No, sir! Not the tallest fool in Narnia." Here he glared very fiercely up at Wimbleweather, but the giant, who was always a stage behind everybody else, had not yet discovered what was being talked about down at his feet, and so he missed the point. "Now, why have your followers all drawn their swords, may I ask?" said Aslan. May it please your majesty, said the second mouse, whose name was Peep-a-Cheek. We are all waiting to cut off our own tails if our chief must go without his. We will not bear the shame of wearing an honor which is denied to the High Mouse. What are Reepicheep's followers willing to do? Riley? Very good. Ah, roared Aslan. Now you've conquered me. You all have great hearts. Not for the sake of your dignity, Reepicheep, but for the love that is between you and your people, and still more for the kindness your people showed me long ago, when you ate away the cords that bound me on the stone table. And it was then, though you may have long forgotten it, that you began to be talking mice. You shall have your tail again. When were the mice given the privilege of being able to talk? Luke? Very good. They were the animal. They chewed off the cords that bound Aslan to the stone table when he was brought back to life. Okay? So he says, because of that, and because your people honor and love you this much, I will give you your tail back. Before Aslan had finished speaking, the new tail was in its place. Then, at Aslan's command, Peter bestowed the knighthood of the Order of the Lion on Caspian. And Caspian, as soon as he was knighted, he himself bestowed it on Truffle Hunter and Trumpkin and Reepicheep, and made Dr. Cornelius his Lord Chancellor, and confirmed the Bulgy Bear in his hereditary office of Marshal of the Lists. And there was great applause. After this, the Telmarine soldiers, firmly but without taunts or blows, were taken across the ford, and all of them were put under lock and key in the town of Verona and were given beef and beer. They made a great fuss about wading in the river, for they all hated and feared running water, just as much as they hated and feared woods and animals. But in the end, the nuisance was over, and then the nicest parts of that long day began. Lucy, sitting close to Aslan and divinely comfortable, wondered what the trees were doing. At first she thought they were merrily dancing. They were certainly going around slowly in 2 circles, one from left to right and the other from right to left. Then she noticed that they kept throwing something down in the center of both circles. Sometimes she thought they were cutting off long strands of their hair. At other times it looked as if they were breaking off bits of their fingers. But if so, they had plenty of fingers to spare, and it did not hurt them. But whatever they were throwing down, when it reached the ground, it became brushwood or dry sticks. Then 3 or 4 of the red dwarfs came forward with their tinder boxes and set light to the pile, which first crackled and then blazed, and finally roared as a woodland bonfire on midsummer night ought to do. And everyone sat down in a wide circle around it. So they're having a big bonfire, basically. Then Bacchus and Silenus and the Maenads began to dance, far wilder than the dance of the trees. Not merely a dance for fun and beauty, though it was that too, but a magic dance of plenty. And wherever their hands touched and where their feet fell, the feast came into existence. Okay, they're going to have this huge feast. Listen to this. Sides of roasted meat that filled the grove with delicious smell, and wheaten cakes and oaten cakes, honey and many-colored sugars and cream as thick as porridge and as smooth as still water, peaches, nectarines, pomegranates, pears, grapes, strawberries, raspberries, pyramids, and cataracts of fruit. Then, in great wooden cups and bowls and mazers, wreathed with ivy came the wines, dark, thick ones like syrups of mulberry juice, and clear red ones like red jellies liquefied, and yellow wines and yellow-green and greenish-yellow. Makes you hungry, right?
I'm already hungry.
But for the tree people, different food was provided. When Lucy saw Clodsley's shovel and his moles scuffling up the dirt in various places, which Bacchus had pointed out to them, and realized that the trees were going to eat earth, it gave her rather a shudder. Trees aren't going to eat people fruit, right? Trees are going to eat different kinds of dirt. But when she saw that the earths were actually brought to them, she felt quite different. They began with a rich brown loam that looked almost exactly like chocolate. So like chocolate, in fact, that Edmund tried a piece of it, but he did not find it at all nice. When the rich loam had taken the edge off their hunger, the trees turned to an earth of the kind you see in Somerset, which is almost pink. They said it was lighter and sweeter. At the cheese stage, they had a chalky soil, and then went on to delicate confections of the finest gravels, powdered with choice silver sand. They drank very little wine, and it made the Hollies very talkative. For the most part, they quenched their thirst with deep draughts of mingled dew and rain, flavored with forest flowers and the airy taste of the thinnest clouds. Yes? I don't know. Good question. Thus Aslan feasted the Narnians till long after the sunset had died away, and the stars had come out. And the great fire, now hotter but less noisy, shone like a beacon in the dark woods. And the frightened Telmarine saw it from far away, and wondered what it might mean. The best thing of all about this feast was that there was no breaking up or going away. But as the talk grew quieter and slower, one after another would begin to nod and finally drop off to sleep, with their feet stretched toward the fire and good friends on either side, till at last there was silence all around the circle, and the chattering of water over stone at the ford of Verona could be heard once more. But all night Aslan and the moon gazed upon each other with joyful and unblinking eyes. Okay, I'm not going to take your hand, so we got to finish this up. I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. Not right now. Sorry. Next day, messengers, who were chiefly squirrels and birds, were sent over all the countries with a proclamation to the scattered Telmarines, including, of course, the prisoners of Verona. They were told that Caspian was now king, and that Narnia would henceforth belong to the talking beasts, and the dwarfs and dryads and fauns and other creatures quite as much as to the men. Any who chose to stay under the new conditions might do so, but for those who did not like the idea of staying in Narnia with Caspian as king, Aslan would provide another home. Anyone who wished to go there must come to Aslan and the kings at the ford of Verona by noon on the 5th day. You may imagine that this caused plenty of head-scratching among the Telmarines. Some of them, chiefly the young ones, had, like Caspian, heard stories of the old days, and were delighted that they had come back. They were already making friends with the creatures. All of these decided to stay in Narnia. But most of the older men, especially those who had been important under Miraz, were sulky, and had no wish to live in a country where they could not rule the roost. Live here? With a lot of blooming performing animals? Oh, no fear, they said. And ghosts, too, some added with a shudder. That's what those there dryads really are. It's not canny. They were also suspicious. I don't trust him, they said. Not that awful lion, no. He won't keep his claws off us for long, you'll see. But then they were equally suspicious of his offer to give them a new home. Yeah, right. Take us off to his den and eat us one by one, most likely, they muttered. And the more they talked to one another, the sulkier and more suspicious they became. But on the appointed day, more than half of them turned up. Okay, so Aslan was giving them a choice. He's saying, listen, Telmarines, you're no longer in charge. Caspian will be king, but he's going to rule old Narnia. Okay, you're welcome to stay and become part of his country if you're going to honor him as king. But if you don't want to, Aslan is going to send you somewhere else to build a different country. So you have a choice. At one end of the glade, Aslan had caused to be set up 2 stakes of wood, higher than a man's head and about 3 feet apart. A third and lighter piece of wood was bound across them at the top, uniting them so that the whole thing looked like a doorway from nowhere into nowhere. Oh my goodness. Go ahead. You gotta finish this. Okay, let's keep going. In front of this stood Aslan himself, with Peter on his right and Caspian on his left. Riley, just make sure you finish this, okay?
I already know.
Grouped round them were Susan and Lucy, Trumpkin and Trufflehunter, and the Lord Cornelius, Glenstorm, Reepicheep, and others. The children and the dwarfs had made good use of the royal wardrobes in what had been the castle of Miraz and was now the castle of Caspian, and what with silk and cloth of gold, with snowy linen glancing through slashed sleeves, with silver mail shirts and jeweled sword hilts, with gilt helmets and feathered bonnets, they were almost too bright to look at. Even the beasts wore rich chains about their necks. Yet no one was looking at them or the children. The living and strokable gold of Aslan's mane outshone them all. The rest of the old Narnians stood down on each side of the glade. At the far end stood the Telmarines. See, girl. The sun shone brightly, and pennants or flags fluttered in the light wind. Men of Telmar, said Aslan, you who seek a new land, hear my words. I will send you all to your own country, which I know and you do not. We don't even remember Telmar. We don't even know where it is. We don't know what it's like, grumbled the Telmarines. What is Telmar? Connor?
The petition in the group.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
Yes. Aslan. You came into Narnia out of Telmar, said Aslan, but you came into Telmar from another place altogether. You do not belong to this world at all. You came hither, certain generations ago, out of that same world to which the High King Peter belongs. So long before the Telmarines ever arrived in Narnian world, they were actually part of the real world, like Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy. At this, half the Telmarines began whimpering. There you are. Told you so. He's going to kill us all and send us right out of this world. And the other half began throwing out their chests and slapping one another on the back and whispering, There you are. Might have guessed we didn't belong to this place with all its queer and nasty and unnatural creatures. We're of royal blood, you'll see. And even Caspian and Cornelius and the children turned to Aslan with looks of amazement on their faces. Peace, said Aslan in the low voice which was nearest to his growl. The earth seemed to shake a little, and every living thing in the grove became still as stone. You, Sir Caspian, said Aslan, you might have known that you could be no true king of Narnia, unless, like the kings of old, you were a son of Adam, and came from the world of Adam's sons. And so you are. Many years ago in that world, in a deep sea of that world which is called the South Sea, a shipload of pirates was driven by storm onto an island. And there they did as pirates would. They killed the natives and took the native women for wives, and made palm wine and drank and were drunk, and lay in the shade of the palm trees, and woke up and quarreled, and sometimes even killed one another. And in one of these frays 6 men were put to flight by the rest, and fled with their women into the center of the island, and up a mountain, and went, as they thought, into a cave to hide. But it was one of those magical places of that world, one of the chinks or chasms between that world and this one. There were many chinks or chasms between worlds in old times, but they have grown much more rare. This was one of the last, but I do not say it was the last. What he's talking about, these chinks or chasms are like portals between the real world and Narnia. Lucy found one on accident in the wardrobe, okay, that took her from the real world into Narnia. And the Telmarines, these men who used to be pirates in the South Sea in the real world, found one on accident on this island as well. Yes? I'm sorry, what?
In the book after this, from one of the chasms or something?
Oh, it'll be the painting? I would assume so, yeah. Very good. And so they fell, or rose, or blundered, or dropped right through, and found themselves all of a sudden in this world, in the land of Telmar, which was then unpeopled. But why it was unpeopled is a long story. I will not tell it now. And in Telmar their descendants lived and became a fierce and proud people. And after many generations there was a famine in Telmar, and they invaded Narnia, which was then in some disorder, but that would also be a long story, and conquered it and ruled it. Do you mark all this well, King Caspian? So Aslan is giving him the history of his people, saying this is where the Telmarines came from and how they got into Narnia. I do indeed, sir, said Caspian. I was wishing, though, that I came of a more honorable lineage. You came of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, said Aslan, and that is both honor enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar, and shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor on earth. Be content. And Caspian bowed. Okay, that's also a super, I love this part, okay? Aslan, because Caspian's just saying, you know what, I'm not super proud of my ancestors. Those guys were pirates, they murdered people, they stole, they killed stuff. I'm not really proud of where I came from. And Aslan says, hold on, you come of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve. You are a son of Adam and a daughter of Eve. And that is both honor enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar. That should make you proud enough to lift your head and say, you know what, I am a son of Lord Adam and Lady Eve. But it's just enough shame, it's just enough embarrassment to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor on earth. He says, there are things for you to be proud of and things for you to be ashamed of. But both of those help put you right in the middle where you need to be. Does that make sense? Not yet. Be content. Caspian bowed. And now, said Aslan, you men and women of Telmar, will you go back to that island in the world of men from which your fathers first came? It's not a bad place. The race of those pirates who first found it has died out, and it is without inhabitants. There are good wells of fresh water, and fruitful soil, and timber for building, and fish in the lagoons, and the other men of that world have not yet discovered it. The chasm is open for your return. But this I must warn you, that once you have gone through, it will close behind you forever. There will be no more commerce or going back and forth between the worlds by that door. Okay? So he sets up a little like doorway with sticks. Okay? So there's like kind of one stick here. Okay? Another stick over here. And then a big long stick kind of taped across it. Okay? And he says if you want to go into that land, you need to go through this doorway. Okay? It looks like this doorway is normal, right? You just walk right under those sticks and still be in the same world. But because Aslan created it, it's actually a chasm between both worlds. And these Telmarines can go back through that chasm to the world their people have been before. Okay? But if they choose to do that, they can't turn around and come back to Narnia. It's a one-way street. Once they leave it, they're gone. There was silence for a moment. Then, a burly, decent-looking fellow among the Telmarine soldiers pushed forward and said, well, I'll take that offer. And it is well chosen, said Aslan. And because you have spoken first, strong magic is upon you. Your future in that world will be great. Come forth. The man, now a little pale, a little nervous, came forward. Aslan and his court drew aside, leaving him free access to the empty doorway of the stakes. Look over here. That's what it looks like. Go through it, my son, said Aslan, bending toward him and touching the man's nose with his own. As soon as the lion's breath came about him, a new look came into the man's eyes. Startled, but not unhappy, as if he were trying to remember something. Then he squared his shoulders and walked into the door. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. They saw the 3 pieces of wood, and through them the trees and grass and sky of Narnia. They saw the man between the doorposts, and then in 1 second he had vanished utterly. From the other end of the glade, the remaining Telmarines set up a wailing. Ah! What's happened to him? Do you mean to murder us? We won't go that way. And then one of the clever Telmarines said, we don't see any other world through those sticks. If you want us to believe in it, why doesn't one of you guys go? All your own friends are keeping well away from those sticks. Instantly, Reepicheep stood forward and bowed. If my example can be of service, Aslan, he said, I will take 11 mice through that arch at your bidding without a moment's delay. Very brave, Reepicheep. Nay, little one, said Aslan, laying his velvety paw ever so lightly on Reepicheep's head. They would do dreadful things to you in that world. They would show you at fairs. It is the others who must lead. Come on, said Peter, suddenly to Edmund and Lucy. Our time's up. What do you mean? Said Edmund. This way, said Susan, who seemed to know all about it. Back into the trees. We've got to change. Change what? Asked Lucy. Why, our clothes, of course, said Susan. Nice fools we'd look like on the platform of an English station in these clothes. But our other things are at Caspian's castle, said Edmund. No, they're not, said Peter, still leading the way into the thickest wood. They're all here. They were brought down in bundles this morning. It's all arranged. Is that what Aslan was talking to you and Susan about this morning? Asked Lucy. Yes, that and other things, said Peter, his face very solemn. I can't tell it to you all. There were things he wanted to say to Sue and me because we're not coming back to Narnia. Never? Cried Edmund and Lucy in dismay. Oh, you two are, answered Peter. At least, from what he said, I'm pretty sure he means you two get to come back someday. But not Sue and me. He says we're getting too old. Oh, Peter, said Lucy, what awful bad luck! Can you even bear it? Well, I think I can, said Peter. It's all rather different from what I thought. You'll understand when it comes your last time. But, quick, here are our things. It was odd and not very nice to take off their royal clothes and to come back in their school things, which were not very fresh and clean now, into that great assembly. One or two of the nastier Telmarines jeered or made fun of them. But the other creatures all cheered and rose up in honor of Peter the High King and Queen Susan of the Horn and King Edmund and Queen Lucy. They were affectionate and, on Lucy's part, tearful farewells with all their old friends. Animal kisses and hugs from Bulgy Bears and hands wrung by Trumpkin and a last tickly, whiskerish embrace with Truffle Hunter. And of course, Caspian offered the horn back to Susan, and of course Susan told him to keep it. And then, wonderfully and terribly, it was farewell to Aslan himself, and Peter took his place with Susan's hands on his shoulders, and Edmund's on hers, and Lucy's on his, and the first of the Telmarines on Lucy's, and so in a long line they moved forward to the door. After that came a moment which is hard to describe, for the children seemed to be seeing three things at once. One was the mouth of a cave opening into the glaring green and blue of an island in the Pacific, where all the Telmarines would find themselves the moment they were through the door. The second was a glade in Narnia, the faces of dwarves and beasts, the deep eyes of Aslan, and the white patches on the badger's cheeks. But the third, which rapidly swallowed up the other two, was the gray, gravelly surface of a platform in a country station, and a seat with luggage around it, where they were all sitting as if they had never even moved from it. A little flat and dreary for a moment after all they had been through, but also, unexpectedly, nice in its own way. What with the familiar railway smell and the English sky and the summer term before them. Well, said Peter, we have had quite a time. Oh, bother, said Edmund. I've left my new torch in Narnia. And the end. All right. Hey, we have like 4 minutes to be lined up now.